So, when I finished Abyss, I was a little taken aback by how many negative reviews it had. I mean, damn, people really thought this show was garbage. And I was reading these negative takes like, alright, cool. Now I'm even more hyped to make this video. Let me make this clear. You are not about to watch a whole video of me telling you this show is a misunderstood masterpiece. Abyss had a lot of problems, and a lot of the criticism I read about it was completely fair and then some. But you know what? I also really enjoyed a lot of things about it, and I had fun watching it. And the ending, I'll get to that later. But even so, I liked this show. So here I am to tell you why I enjoyed it, where I had issues with it, what some of the deeper themes embedded in it were, and what commentary it seeks to convey. Oh, and also hopefully it'll either help you decide whether you want to watch the show or not, or if you've seen it already, maybe you'll find some of the points I touch on somewhat interesting. For those of you who have seen my other reviews, you already know the drill, but for all of you newcomers, it's going to be a spoiler-free review first, followed by deeper analysis with spoilers afterwards. Sound fair? Alright, get comfy, grab a snack, perhaps a delicious Subway sandwich. Subway, eat fresh. This is 210East, and here's my review for Abyss. Abyss is a Korean series that you can stream on Netflix. It originally came out in 2019 and has the typical Kdrama format of 16 episodes, each a little more than an hour long. Here's the basic premise. After meeting an untimely demise in separate incidents, Cha-min and Go Se-yoon discover they've come back to life in new bodies they don't recognize. What it doesn't say in this little Google synopsis is that these two main characters are brought back to life by a mysterious, extraterrestrial-owned, glowing, magic, Dragon Ball kind of sphere thing, which is called Abyss. The setup and new body transformation occurs within the first episode, so there's no need to get familiar with the original faces of these two main characters because the reborn versions of them are going to be the faces you'll be getting familiar with for the rest of the series. My initial impression of this show was basically, what the fuck am I watching? This is so ridiculous. And yet, Abyss is totally self-aware. It knows how ridiculous it is and even takes the time to poke fun at itself in certain moments in the first episode, as well as throughout the rest of the show. And that made it easier for me to accept it as well. It makes even more sense when you realize that this ridiculousness and absurdity is actually intentional. I'll go into more detail about this during the deeper analysis portion of this review, but basically all you need to know for now is that if you start watching and feel like it's too ridiculous to keep watching, just be patient. It's all a part of a commentary the show gradually constructs as the story unfolds. At first, Abyss seems like it's just going to be this very surface-level, goofy, rom-com, softcore crime thriller, but it evolves and transforms into a lot more complex drama that covers some pretty important issues, such as trauma, abuse, the relationship between our outer appearance and inner self, and even some commentary about plastic surgery in Korea. What I'm trying to say is that it's got a lot more going on than you might think at first glance. This isn't just true regarding its thematic complexity, but also its genre and tone. It's got romance, action, comedy, crime solving, thrills, emotional punches, and the pacing for the most part keeps you satisfied with a sufficient dose of suspense. Anyone who's seen Abyss would agree that it's these sudden changes in tone and pacing that make Abyss so much fun. One minute you'll feel like you're watching a cute rom-com, and the next second a phone call will come or a shadowy figure will emerge, and suddenly we're in a car chase or someone's being held hostage. Also, keep in mind, it is a show about a magic sphere that can bring people back to life, so get ready to see characters die, but then come back, maybe even die again. It's got a lot of twists and turns, and it's truly a roller coaster type experience. The acting is solid with a few standout performances, but I gotta say that for me, Park Bo-young, the actress who plays Go Se-yoon, trapped in Mi-do's body, pretty much runs away with the Best Performance award. Her comedic timing is on point, and she just has great charisma and these amazing facial expressions. Also, I don't know about you guys, but I found her way prettier than the original face for Seyun. And I normally wouldn't even mention stuff like this, but the show makes such a point of reiterating how Mi-do's face is ugly or plain or common looking, while Seyun's original face was supposedly so beautiful to the point of her being worshipped by like every guy ever. I mean, they're both pretty, don't get me wrong, but I'm just not really seeing the vast gap in beauty or whatever. So another standout for me was Lee Si-yoon. I'm really sorry about these pronunciations as usual, guys. Lee Si-yoon, who plays Detective Park Dong-chil. The guy was just straight up hilarious, and he played his part really well. So for all you romance fans out there wondering this whole time, but what about the love story? How does it fit into the narrative? Well, it's there. It's a slow build-up and is like almost unbearably wholesome and innocent. So if that's your cup of tea, then you're in luck. The romance also ties in with some of the commentary the show makes, such as the inner versus outer self and identity in general. Okay, what else? Okay, cinematography was whatever. Not bad, but not special in any way. Overall, I wasn't mad at the soundtrack, but it definitely wasn't blowing my mind either. I really so much more prefer when K-dramas use Korean songs for their soundtracks over English ones. So that was nice to see in this show. Alright, so before I finish up, I'd like to go over a few other things that you should know before you watch. These are some aspects of the show that might be deal breakers if you're someone who's thinking of watching Abyss, or might be things you're looking for in a show. First, if you're really into crime dramas and you take them seriously and are looking for it to be hyper-realistic, this is not going to be the show for you. Yes, there is a crime-solving murder mystery plot thread woven into this show, but there are a lot of really unrealistic moments along the way where you're going to be like, okay, that wouldn't even happen, or why would anyone do that? If that's a pet peeve of yours, it might get a little difficult to watch this. To enjoy Abyss, you need to be able to let some stuff slide, and remember, it's not supposed to be taken deadly serious at all times. That's not to say the show can't get serious in terms of tone and subject matter, but yeah, a lot of the crime and police procedural stuff is kind of sketch. Second, when you first start off, especially if you're new to Korean shows in general, keeping track of everyone's name and who's who can be overwhelming. Characters are going to switch bodies, have false names, and yeah, just try to stay with it. It took me a while to get every character down, but once I did, it was smooth sailing. And yeah, I'm sure you'll all get the hang of it like I did. For me, this part of the show, along with the plot, which as I explained gets more and more complex with all the twists and turns, was actually part of why I found this show so much fun. I found myself wanting to figure everything out, to guess who was working with who, and who was really someone else. Alright, so that's it for the spoiler-free review. Abyss. It's a wild ride, it's kinda goofy, but it can also get dark, be emotional, suspenseful, and overall, it's just a lot of fun. Think like rom-com with serial killer vibes, some family drama, and a kind of Death Note feel with the all-powerful otherworldly object that comes into human possession and has its own set of rules and conditions. As long as you keep an open mind and let it unfold and evolve, you won't be disappointed. Except maybe with the ending, but come on, it's all about the journey, right? And you know, all jokes aside, I'll say this much. Whatever issues I had with the ending did not outweigh the enjoyment I got from the rest of the show leading up to it. It wasn't like some other shows, such as Something in the Rain, where I initially felt like everything was riding on that last episode and the conclusion. So I'll just leave that there for now. But yeah, check it out. Abyss. It's not complete garbage. And if you stick around, I'll present my case why I think it did some things pretty well. If this is where you stop watching, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for tuning in, and here's your warning for incoming spoilers in... So right from the beginning of the show, the juxtaposition of outer appearance and the inner self is established. This is a motif that develops into a theme of identity. On a very basic visual level, the transformation of the two main characters into different bodies with different faces is the threshold to what the show explores within this theme. Early on, there are many references to Min's new form or body being so incredibly handsome. There are countless instances of random people he encounters who remark on how good looking he is. Although we haven't really been given a big enough sample size of how he was treated by people before his transformation, it's pretty much implied this attention is new to him, as he handles it very awkwardly at first. So here we see a little commentary on society. These remarks from random people represent the value society places in appearance and physical beauty. And I mean, that's cool and all, but we can do better. Then there's Se-yoon, who is reborn in someone else's body, the body of a person that she actually knows from before and is, oh, by the way, still alive too. And so she is forced to act like another person, to assume their identity, all while trying to maintain her own on the inside. If we see this theme of identity as the baseline for everything else the show branches off into thematically, then these two protagonists serve as the first two levels of exploration. Let me try to spell this out. So Min's rebirth is basically the first level. It's not very deep or complex thematically, since even though he dies and is reborn, he does not come back as another person that he knows or that really exists as far as the universe of the show reveals. It's just this random guy who's really handsome. It's supposed to represent his true soul, I guess. And yeah, Min has to deal with none of his friends or family believing at first that he is who he says he is, and that continues for a while, but I mean, it kind of just boils down to him having to deal with being short and not very attractive in his former life to now being tall and handsome. And I mean, yeah, pretty sure no one in that situation would be complaining too much. Let me just be crystal clear. I'm not saying that Min doesn't face any struggle or hardship during the show, or even that his character isn't involved in the more complex themes of the show. I'm strictly talking about his form of initial rebirth within the context of this theme of identity. If you remember, Min is also the first character to reveal himself as being the real Cha-min. It takes some convincing, of course, but there is a fair portion of the show where Min is out in the open and being accepted as the real him, who just somehow got the most unbelievable plastic surgery work done on his face and somehow on his height, I guess. This is getting into one of the branches the show makes in terms of its commentary, as it makes several references like this to plastic surgery. This commentary is all very tongue-in-cheek and is in no way subtle, but I still think the show was really clever in how they weave this commentary about plastic surgery in Korea into the more serious theme of identity. The abyss itself could also be seen as a metaphor or symbol for plastic surgery in a way. What do people who get plastic surgery desire? To be reborn as a new and better version of themselves, or perhaps to become the person they believe they are on the inside. Okay, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but let me just finish up covering this plastic surgery stuff. So besides these references by the show in a symbolic way, there's also just direct references made by the characters themselves. They appear throughout the show, and it's just another example of how the show is not only aware of how ridiculous it is, but also how it uses this ridiculousness to convey its commentary. Besides Min somehow getting away with everyone thinking, oh, Min just had plastic surgery, that's why he looks so different. Yeah, seems legit. There's also the whole Mi-do thing. She returns from the US, and this should be a big uh-oh for Se-yoon because what the fuck, they both have the same face. But no, the punchline is that Mi-do, the real Mi-do, has herself had surgery and now looks completely fucking different, making Se-yoon, in Mi-do's former body with her former face, more believable as Mi-do than Mi-do herself. So here we see this hilarious juxtaposition of the alien powers of the abyss, something completely unrealistic and ridiculous, and the magic of plastic surgery, which is a very real thing. Alright, let's get back to the different levels as represented by characters. So we have Min at level 1, and now Se-yoon at level 2. Let's look at her story arc. So like I said before, off the bat, Se-yoon's initial rebirth is just more complex than Min's is. She comes back as a person she knows who is still alive and someone who she now has to impersonate and, in a sense, become. While Min eventually is able to reveal himself and come clean about his new face and his true identity, granted that's only after he's been cleared of being a suspect in a homicide investigation, he basically just goes back to being himself, except now he's just way more good looking. He gets his old job back, and his mom back, and his auntie or whatever, and yeah, he's along for the ride, putting himself in danger, but he does so of his own choice, because he cares for Se-yoon. Se-yoon, on the other hand, didn't just die because she accidentally fell off a building, she was actually murdered. And so her story and her journey of finding the people who killed her is a lot more complex in terms of her dealing with her identity. I mean, if trying to find the people who murdered you in your apartment because you're actually still somehow alive and in your former colleague's body, dealing with the juggling act of pretending to be her isn't a recipe for identity crisis, I don't know what is. Oh, and by the way, she literally saw her own funeral, saw her own coffin being carried away with her own dead body in it, and couldn't get her parents to recognize her because she's in a different body. And that's just in the first episode. It's due to this investigation and dangerous journey towards finding and bringing the people who killed her to justice that she has to remain in this state of pretending not to be herself for so long. She doesn't reveal herself to her parents until almost the end of the show, and oh my god, that must have been so hard. Alright, so Se-yoon, level 2, Min, level 1. And you know what? I should add that Detective Park and Mi-do, the real Mi-do, function as this sort of mirror couple to Se-yoon and Min. They represent a satirical, watered-down, real-life version of what happens to Min and Se-yoon. Park has to deal with his ex-girlfriend coming back looking completely different than before. The comedic contrast here is that he thinks Mi-do's old face was better and that her new face looks like, and I quote, Mr. Bogus. I actually had to look this up on the internet. I guess it's a cartoon show, which I've never heard of, but god damn, he roasted her. But you see what I'm getting at, right? They are the other couple who has to deal with a rebirth or transformation, but in their case, it's not a magic ball from outer space. It's just real-life plastic surgery. Stay with me here, because we're about to go deeper. So let's put Detective Park and Mi-do aside for now. They are basically comedic relief. And that's no shade, but in the context of the thematic landscape, yeah, they kinda are. Then let's take Se-yoon and Min and put them together to represent one side of this theme of identity. It's a side heavily based in the magic of the abyss. And of course, these two both have to go through real-life struggles as well, but it all stems from the abyss. Besides, of course, Se-yoon being murdered. It's also easy to group these two together because, of course, they are the main characters, and also because of their romance, a plot thread that connects them. So if these two represent the abyss, magic, supernatural side, what is the other side? And who represents it? That's right, the O family, and their severely messed up past and trauma. Heejin and Ji-uk both experience pretty serious abuse and trauma from an early age, while their mother also pretty much loses her mind and has to be committed, and all of this stems from the husband, the father, Oh Young-chil, who is not only an abusive father and husband, but also goes on to become a serial killer. Just like the whole plastic surgery parallel, we can take this much more serious theme of abuse, manipulation, and trauma and see how the show expands the symbolic range of the abyss. If we see the abyss as the origin of all the absurdity that Min and Se-yoon experience, an absurdity that causes them to become reborn and create struggles with their identity, then Oh Young-chil and the terrible things he did to his family is the real-life equivalent of that. Just like the abyss with Min and Se-yoon, Young-chil and the trauma he inflicted upon them is the source for all of the absurdity in Ji-uk and Heejin's lives. It has caused both of them to be reborn in their own way, by changing their names and having very real struggles with their own identity. And this is such a cool way that the show gives the abyss multiple symbolic meanings at once, whether it's the very satirical and humorous jab at plastic surgery, or the very serious rippling effects of trauma and abuse. When considering this, it's very fitting that Oh Young-chil comes into possession of the abyss, literally joining these two opposing sources of absurdity. However, as we see in the show, Young-chil doesn't truly understand the abyss and its rules, and in the end it's his misuse of it that becomes his downfall, which is poetic justice if I ever saw it. Let's look at some other stuff with this structure of duality within the theme of absurdity and identity in mind. So one of the smaller issues I saw some people have with this show was the fact that the abyss rules didn't seem to be very consistent. Like, okay, Min came back as this handsome guy because he was a good guy on the inside, and so he was given a handsome face to match that good soul. I'll buy that. But why the fuck is Mi-do's face Se-yoon's true soul? Like, It makes no sense. And why does Oh Young-chil just get older? Later on in the show, Min and Se-yoon even address this inconsistency, but they're just kind of guessing and don't really figure it out either, except that they say they must be exceptions or something. Anyways, I bring this up because although this inconsistency is there in some places, I think I can explain a little bit of why so many of the characters had different variations within their rebirths. If we keep in mind that thematically, Cha-min and Se-yoon are on one side and the Oh family are on the other side, then the differences in their rebirths make a lot more sense. Min and Se-yoon are reborn into new bodies and so in their own ways have to deal with this absurd reality of having to take a new identity. However, as we already covered before, all the members of the Oh family have already gone through real-life versions of having to take on new identities and become new people, or lead a double life. Let's just quickly go over all of them. Soo-jin becomes Hee-jin, and when she meets Min, was planning to con him because she has changed her identity to escape her past and her father, and lives a life of deception and conning, pretending to be one thing but being another. Then we have Tae-jin, whose identity change was even more messed up. I mean, both these kids get abused from an early age, but his identity change comes in this truly crazy way where he witnesses a murder and offers to help cover it up if the judge guy adopts him. It's because of this that he is able to become Ji-yuk and leave an entirely new life. And then we have Young-chil himself, who lives his own double life as both a famous surgeon who does so much good in the world by saving people's lives, while secretly he is this monster who abuses his kids and murders people in cold blood. Then there's the mother, Mrs. Jang, I don't remember her name, who becomes mentally ill and in her own way transforms and is reborn into this childlike state. Whether it's the mother or the two kids, all of their transformations, double lives, or rebirths are all done in order to escape and distance themselves from Oh Young-chil, whether physically or psychologically. Okay, sorry, I know I rambled on there a bit, but my point is when you consider all of this, it makes sense that everyone who gets reborn by the Abyss in the O family wouldn't have a face change. I mean, they are already leading double lives, they are veterans of being reborn and dealing with identity issues. So again, it's this duality between absurdity through magic and the supernatural, and the absurdity of the terrible things people can do to each other. This commentary is directly mentioned in the show towards the end in a scene with Mi-do and Hee-jin. Mi-do is basically talking about how everything that's happening is so crazy, and Hee-jin saying stuff like, yeah, I know we must have seemed so crazy to you, telling you there is this magic ball that could bring people back to life, and the only people that can see it are ones that have been revived. And Mi-do's like, yeah, it's pretty absurd, but I realize there are so many other things in this world that are even more absurd. This statement really just sums up the whole theme and commentary from the show and what it's saying to us as the audience. Basically, yeah, a magic ball from outer space that brings people back to life is a pretty absurd idea for a show, but hey, look at all this shit that happens in real life. Isn't that just as absurd and just as unbelievable as well? This is why the show's development thematically is so well done in my opinion. It starts you off with the first form of absurdity, the Abyss, then slowly introduces and integrates the real-life absurdity of abuse, trauma, and violence, and forces you to look at them side by side. Just let me quickly burn off a couple other cool details I noticed when I went back and watched the first episode. Here we go. The very first time we see Oh Young-chil, he encounters a mother and a son, foreshadowing his abuse towards his own family and son Ji-yuk, his double life of killing people and also saving and caring for people. The first time we see Mi-do, it's at the airport and Min mistakes her for Hee-jin, his fiancé, even though he doesn't even know who Mi-do is yet, foreshadowing that eventually this will be the face of his fiancé. Mi-do is shown calling her doctor right afterwards about her surgery to change faces, which makes it an even more clever and funny foreshadowing. She also has a wig on, which Se-yoon in Mi-do's body will wear later on in the show. Also, Min and Se-yoon have their first kiss during episode 8, literally halfway through the show. This doesn't really mean much, but I just thought I'd mention it because it was a nice detail. Also, can we just take a moment to stop and appreciate the fact this show is also ridiculously absurd in a third way, which is that if you think about it, it's actually the story of a guy escaping the friend zone. Now that is absurd. But regardless, it's still an amazing feat that should be recognized. Alright, since the ending is low-hanging fruit anyways, I'm gonna sort of combine my thoughts on the ending with the problems I had with this show. So let's just get it out in the open. For the most part, the ending really left a lot of plot holes unexplained, and not in a cool, ambiguous way that makes you think, but more in a way that makes you think the writers just didn't know how to wrap it all up. I don't know about you guys, but during the whole show, I was really looking forward to and wondering whether those aliens were gonna make another appearance. I mean, I had some questions about the Abyss, since some of how it worked and its rules seemed inconsistent and didn't really make too much sense, and I was hoping the aliens would come back and explain a little more about it, but they didn't. Instead, it was just the guy alien or whatever, and he's like, yeah, you can't be in this planet, but if you go back home, you'll be in pain or something like that. Where did Mean go? What was that planet? Why did the old guy have an abyss? Why did it seem like in the beginning the aliens didn't even really know too much about the abyss either? It was just so weird. And the whole symbolism with the abyss and the newborn child and Se-Yun being the thing that brings a greater miracle, and then it disappears when she finds out she's pregnant. I mean, it's a nice feel-good sentiment. It's like, I get that, but And the whole thing with the old guy bringing him back to life, it was just so okay, sure. So the point here is the ending was pretty underwhelming. But just like I said at the beginning of this review, it didn't really prevent me from looking back on this show fondly, and it didn't ruin everything I enjoyed about it either. It just sort of clumsily fizzled out instead. So before I finish this review, let's just go through another speed round of all my issues with Abyss, from big ones to smaller ones that I'll just throw in there for fun. Ready? And go. So many moments involving the police and the investigation were so unrealistic. One example being in episode 10 when they let Young Chil go to the bathroom by himself without being in the room. That would never happen with a serial killer that was being transported somewhere. Then there's the very common heroes going and doing it all themselves trope. So many situations where it was so dumb of Min or Se-Yun or both to go alone into dangerous situations without just calling the police and letting them take care of it. Although I guess these are the same guys that let a serial killer out of their sight because the serial killer asked to go fucking take a leak. Anyways, one example of this is in episode 6 where Se-Yun goes to her parents' chicken place where Young Chil is holding them captive. Like, just call the police. I know he said come alone, but you can still be discreet. If she had just called the police for backup, he would have been caught right there and then that night. Also, Heejin's ending was pretty random. I'm glad she found peace and grows fruit or whatever, but for someone who was probably the most caught up in everyone else's drama and suffered so much for it, she really just gets sort of pushed aside at the end and is kind of forgotten about. I mean, in the end, I'm just glad she's happy, so I don't know. All right, we made it to the end of my review for Abyss. This is TwoTenEast. If you enjoyed this review and you want to let me know, or if you enjoyed this show and want to support it by having more people see this review, go ahead and hit that like button, share the video, and I hope you'll also consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. With that being said, you guys have a great day, and I'll see you next time.